Alrighty, well, it's 5:30 in the morning and it is raining. And the weatherman told us it would, so he was right. There's Rocky. He's looking there. He's not too impressed because he likes to go outside in the daytime. And if it keeps raining, he's going to have an indoor day, I guess. And he's not going to like that very much. Not that he'll be allowed to go outside if he wants to, but he's not going to want to. So it kind of sucks to be Rocky today, I guess. Kind of sucks to be me too, because I was going to be working this weekend, but now, of course, with the rain, I won't be. But again, I kind of knew that was the case because I knew what was predicted to come, and I could tell because the humidity built up. The air was so heavy yesterday, you could tell that there was a lot of moisture built up. And so that's what we're getting now, is we're getting all that moisture falling, which in turn will break the humidity. So it's not all bad, and the work is still there. So where I would have been working this weekend, the work is still there. It still needs to be done. So what on earth is going on? These glasses, it's a shadow from the glasses. Okay. Looked like I had a big mole under my eye, but it's a shadow from the glasses there that's making it look that way. All right. Holy smokes, what's happened there? Anyway, I'll tell you a story. This story, well, all this stuff occurred a few years back now. Um, I had some friends that lived in basically what it was is it was a house. And my friends lived in the basement part of the house, or in the bottom floor. It was weird. It was like there was a kind of the ground floor was partially underground and partially above ground. And then there was an upstairs, which was a separate unit. Anyway, I had friends that lived in the bottom of the house. You had to walk through the garage to get to where the apartments were. Where, if you went through the garage, you went through one door and there was a little vestibule. And there was a door that went into the bottom apartment where my friends lived. And then there was another door that went in. If you opened it up, there'd be a set of stairs that would take you to the top apartment. In the top apartment, there was a woman lived there by the name of Christine. And she had two teenage boys. Um, they'd be grown men by now because this story takes place, about 15 years ago now, I guess. Would have been about 15 years ago. Anyway, she had moved here from Quebec to be with a guy she met online. And the guy's name was Larry. And I ended up giving him the nickname Scary Larry. Because Larry was a schizophrenic. And Larry was using a lot of cannabis, and he was taking handfuls of pills that he bought off the street. Larry was also an informant for the Ontario Provincial Police. He was making drug buys for the police. Basically, they were giving him marked bills, bills that the serial numbers had been recorded on, and then he'd make the drug buy. Rocky's here. He'd make the drug buy. I hope you can hear me. I don't know. I'm shifting this thing around because Rocky's here. And I don't know if you can hear me or not. I hope you can. Anyway, he was making the he'd make a drug buy. And then after he made the buy, the police would go in and raid the place. And the people couldn't deny that they made the deal because they'd have the bills with the corresponding serial numbers in their possession. The money, or because the police had recorded all the serial numbers. And so, anyway, this is what was going on. So Larry was a police informant, which meant that he could commit as much crime as he wanted to and get away with it. And then, of course, because Larry had schizophrenia, he had a lot and was also on a lot of drugs. His mind wasn't good, and he was all over the place mentally. And he believed that if anybody showed his girlfriend or her sons any kindness at all, that they were trying to get in there and take his girlfriend away from him, and that would put him into a violent rage. And this guy was totally, I mean, he was off the chain, insane. Like, he was totally insane. There was one time her car broke down the road, and she was walking home. She had left her car abandoned, and she was walking home. And my friends who were going home, they picked her up. And it happened that they had their son in the car with them, who was, they had their son in the car with them, who was a grown man. He was an adult, and one of his friends, who was also an adult, was in the car with them. So Christine got into the back seat with the two men, because that was the only place to sit in the car. The only available seat was back there with the two men. Well, that night, Larry brought his truck up, and he hooked her car onto a chain, and he towed her car up into the yard. And he asked her, when they were in the driveway, well, if the car broke down way down there, how did you get home? And she said, I started out to walk, but then Jim and Della picked me up. And, Jim and Della and Kelly and Sean. Well, Kelly and Sean were the two men that were with Jim and Della, my friends. And he freaked out. He called her a GD whore because she had rode in a car with these two men. And he smashed the windshield out of her car, and then he smashed the windshield out of his own truck, and then he punched a hole through the vinyl siding on the house. All because she rode in a car with a couple of men. So that's what he was like anyway, this guy. He was completely squirrely. It was scary. And the fact that he was a police informant meant that he was allowed to commit as much crime as he wanted to, and the police would protect him while he did it. Well, one day I was there, and her two sons liked to chip golf balls off a hill behind the house into the woods. And I had a 5-gallon pail that was half full of golf balls. So I happened to be talking to the two young lads. They were just teenagers. I told them, I've got this pail full of golf balls, and you can have them because they're of no use to me. I don't play golf. I have no reason to have them, really. So I told them, I'll bring them out sometime, and I'll just give them to you. You can have them, and you can have some fun with them. That's all. Well, I forgot about it. Life happens and so on, and you forget things, and I'd forgotten about it. And then I thought, well, the only way I'm going to remember is to put the balls into the car. I'll put this pail of golf balls into my car, and then someday when I'm out there, I'll leave them for the young lads. Well, I go out there one day, and Larry's having a big garage sale in the yard. He didn't live there. His girlfriend lived there, but he was using the driveway there for a big yard sale. And anyway, him and Christine were around back, and I went back. I asked about Jim and Della, and they said, oh, they're away for the weekend. So I said, oh, well, thank you. And then I said, oh, by the way, to Christine, I said, I promised your young lads some golf balls I've got. Would it be okay if I leave them here with you? She said that'd be fine. So I went to the car, and I got this pail with the golf balls in it, and I brought them. And I told her, I said, well, I'm going to need my pail, though. I need the pail, because I did need the pail. I wasn't giving them the pail, just the golf balls. So I said, would it be okay if I just dumped them in a pile here, back here in the yard? And she said, that's fine, you know. So I did that, and she thanked me for giving her sons the golf balls, and I told her she was welcome. And on my way out, as I'm walking down the driveway, I noticed this old 1930s, this is part of the stuff Larry had for sale. It was a 1930s Philco Cathedral set type radio. And back in the 80s, I had repaired one of those. It was one that belonged to a friend of mine, and he had gotten it from the convent in Perth, from the Sisters of Providence convent in Perth, Ontario. And that was the first radio they ever had in the convent. And when they went to dispose of it, when they went to throw it away, sometime in the 70s, he got a hold of it and he kept it. And it hadn't worked in years. Anyway, I rebuilt it. I got it working again for him, and it was really good. Like, it actually worked really well. But anyway, this radio was identical to the one I had fixed years before, so of course I took an interest in it. I didn't want to buy it, but I just wanted to look at it. So I stop anyway, and I'm looking at it, and of course what I do is I go around behind it, because just like a mechanic would be interested in the engine of a car, I wanted to look at the electronics in this radio, at the chassis of it, you know, the tubes and the vacuum tubes and the wiring and the resistors and all that stuff. That's the capacitors. That's what I wanted to look at. So I got around behind it anyway, and I'm having a look at the old ballast tubes that are in it. Ballast tubes were used in the 1930s. They were huge, and they had a shape to them. They kind of looked like a light bulb, but then at the top, they kind of went in, and then they had then they kind of went straight up, and they were rounded at the end. It's hard to explain. You'd have to see a ballast tube to really understand what I'm talking about. But ballast tubes is what there was a vacuum tube type called a ballast tube, and that's what was commonly used in the 1930s in radios. Anyway, I'm looking at the old ballast tubes in it, and I'm remembering, you know, like having worked on this thing, or one, not that thing, but one identical to it. And Larry, he comes around the corner of the house, and he stands there, and he just gives me the evil eye. He's glaring at me. And I'm thinking, well, the man probably thinks I'm looking to steal from him or something. That's where I went with it. I thought he probably thinks I'm a thief, wanting to steal something from him, and that's why he's eyeing me up like he is. Anyway, I just nodded at him, and I went back to my car and got in my car, and I left. Didn't think any more of it. A few days later, I go out there. My friends Jim and Della have come home. I'm having a visit with them. Larry's there to visit Christine. Well, as I'm leaving, Larry pulls his truck up alongside my car, because he was leaving too at the same time, and he says to me, what's the story between you and Christine? And I, through the window, he yells this at me, and I said, what? I don't know what you're talking about. I said, what do you mean, what's the story between me and Christine? And he says, well, it's like I said, what's the story? Because he said, you know, a man does not come out to a woman's house just to say hi and to leave golf balls for her sons, unless there's more to it. And I said, oh, I don't know what you're talking about. I say, Christine is the upstairs neighbor, a friend of mine who you know. And I said, that's all there is to it. I promised the young lads the golf balls. I saw they like knocking them off the hill behind the house. I said, I promised them the golf balls. I happened to have them in the car when I came here that day. I didn't come here to see Christine. I came here to see my friends. I said, I just decided to take advantage of the opportunity to leave the golf balls so I could have the use of my pail. Because I said I use that pail. I said, when I go out looking in the ditches for cans and bottles, I use that pail. So I needed the pail back. I didn't have the use of the pail as long as it was full of golf balls. So I said, that's the reason that I left the golf balls. I said, I promised the golf balls to the lads. And I said, I said, Christine and I guess are acquaintances, but that's about it. And he said, yeah, well, effing well, keep it that way. Like that. And then he took off with the gravel flying and everything off the wheels. And I'm kind of sitting there baffled. This was my first indication of how crazy this guy was, Then I found out afterwards that he had done things like he had filled her gas tank with oil and gravel in her car so that she couldn't go anywhere. That might be why her car broke down. I don't know, because he used to do that. He'd sabotage her car so she couldn't go anywhere, and then she'd have to rely on him to drive her in the town and stuff like that. He'd do things like that. It ended up anyway that the guy was dangerous, and he was making threats against me. He told me that he was going to beat me to death with a golf club. He carried a golf club in the bed of his truck, and he pulled the golf club out one time and showed it to me and told me that he was going to beat me to death with it. He wasn't going to do it that day because there were too many witnesses around, he said. But he'd get me alone someday and he'd beat me to death with a golf club. This is what he told me. Because apparently I was trying to take Christine away from him because I had left some golf balls there for her sons. This is the mentality. My friends warned me one day when I came to visit, because he had ordered me not to come to visit my friends anymore. He told me I wasn't allowed to visit my friends anymore, and I told him he could go F himself, basically, because I wasn't going to be told where I could go by him. And that's when he told me he was going to beat me to death with the golf club. Anyway, it ended up that what I ended up doing, and you could say I out-crazied a psychopath is what I did. Because one day I was there visiting Jim and Della, and Jim, he told me, he said, you be careful with that Larry, because he said, he's not all there. The guy's crazy, and he's obsessed with you. He thinks that you're trying to take Christine away from him, and because you're the golf balls and all that. And he said, the guy he's something, I don't know if he's schizophrenic or what, he said, but he said, I'll tell you, we heard from upstairs this morning, because we could hear the conversation that come down through the floor, through the ceiling or whatever, through their floor, through our ceiling. And he was up there yelling at Christine. And he was telling Christine that he is an angel of death sent here by God to kill wicked people. And that there's a list of names in the book of Revelation that only he can see. Anybody else won't be able to see it, but he can. And that that list of names is a list of the people he's been assigned to kill by God. The people who are wicked, who God has ordered him to kill as an angel of death working for God. And apparently my name is on the list. This is what I was told. They told me, your name. He told her that my name was on the list anyway. So Jim was warning me. He was saying, just be very careful. Their son's ex-girlfriend and the mother of his daughter, his son had a daughter, was staying there for a while with Jim and Della. And I guess one day she went upstairs to visit Christine. And she didn't, I guess she just opened the door and walked up the stairs and went into the apartment to see Christine, didn't knock or anything. Well, the next day, and Christine visited with her and she left and nobody thought anything of it. Well, the next day, Jim's coming in from town and Larry's leaving. And Larry motioned for Jim to stop, and Jim stopped his car. Larry was in his truck. And Larry, he says, "I have a bone to pick with you, Jim." And Jim says, "Oh, what about?" Larry says, "Well, yesterday, last evening, Nikki went upstairs to visit Christine, and she didn't knock on the door before she went up there. And now, because Nikki went upstairs and didn't knock on the door first, Christine and I have to break up. And that's your fault because you've allowed Nikki to stay with you." Well, Jim just kind of looked at him and shook his head, grinned, and he said, "Well, sorry to hear about the troubles between you and Christine, Larry, but I think maybe your mental illness is more the cause of whatever's going on than Nikki having went up there to visit Christine or whatever." He said, "I don't see how that could cause the two of you to break up. But anyway," he said, "good luck, I'm going home. Good luck to you, though, Larry." And he went home. Well, a few minutes later, there's a knock at the door. And Della answered the door. And it's Larry standing there. And Larry's in a rage. He's it's the way he's breathing and everything, just like that, standing in the door, and he's got his fists clenched, standing in the doorway. And Jim was sitting on the couch in there, because when he opened the door into the living room. And Jim, he says, Larry says to Jim, he says, "You think I'm crazy?" He said, "You think I'm effing crazy?" And Jim just looked over at him and said, "Yes, I do, Larry. I do think you're crazy." And then Della slammed the door in Larry's face and locked it. And Larry went away. He didn't try to kick the door in or anything. It's a wonder, though. But she just slammed the door in his face and locked it, and he went away. But anyway, getting to the story of how I dealt with Larry, what I did was I found out a bunch of stuff about Larry. See, I'm good at finding things out. Maybe I should have been a detective or something. I don't know. But I found out Larry's full address, his date of birth, a whole bunch of stuff. I'm not going to tell you how I did it, because what I did was actually illegal. So I'm not going to tell you exactly how I did it, but I did do it. I found out a whole bunch of stuff about Larry. And I wrote it all down in a notebook. And then I spent 2 weeks following Larry around. Whenever I wasn't busy with something else, I was following Larry and taking notes. And Larry had a stall at a local flea market and stuff. And I'd have notes like I would have, Saturday, June 21st in the year or whatever. And I would have at back of flea market, sitting on tailgate of truck smoking. This is what I would have, smoking cigarette or whatever. This is what I'd have. I'd have at Canadian Tire gas bar buying lottery tickets or something, because Larry was a compulsive gambler too. And this is what I had anyway. Larry used to also beat Christine up. He used to beat her up pretty severely. Anyway, I spent 2 weeks following him around and compiling notes. And then one day I met Christine in the driveway, and I handed her the notebook, and I said, "You give this to Larry, and you let him know he's talking about killing me. Well, I could have killed him any one of these times because he didn't even know I was there. But I didn't. Yeah, I didn't kill him, obviously, I said, but I could have. So I said, you give this to him and let him know how close he was to death had I chose to inflict death upon him. And, he needs to back off. I'm not trying to interfere with the two of you. I really don't care what the two of you do. I said, I personally, Christine, I think you're a nut. I said, why you would be with somebody like that, I don't know, but that's your business. I said, I'm not looking to be with you, despite what he thinks. And I said, I'm just damn sick of all the drama between the two of you and how it's affected me. So I said, well, the other thing, too, is I was being harassed by the police because Larry was going to the police and he was complaining to them about me being around because he figured I was a threat to him and his relationship or something. So I said, I'm being harassed by the police. I've got these death threats from this crazy person. I said, it's my understanding that he's reading things in the book of Revelation that aren't even there. So he's hallucinating. I said, and I'm tired of it. So I said, you give him this book and you let him know how much danger he could have been in, and that he needs to back the hell off, that's all. So she said she would. And after that, he was terrified of me. Now, the harassment from the OPP was stepped up at that point. They really started going after me. But nothing really much came of it in the end, other than that I was just harassed. Constantly pulled over, constantly harassed, followed around, all that business. But there was one day I showed up there to visit Jim and Della, and Larry and Christine were fighting in the driveway. And Larry was terrified of me by that time because basically I had out-crazied him, which was quite an accomplishment given the fact that Larry was psychopathic. He was literally psychopathic, this guy was. And I had frightened him because I had, I guess, proven myself to be even crazier than he was. But it ended up that, and I think the fact that I had been so close to him so many times and he didn't even know it, and that I had found out all this stuff about him, that would have freaked them out too. Like, how did I know his full address, his date of birth, and a bunch of other information, which I did. I wrote that all down in the book too. How did I know that? Well, I mean, like I say, how I found that out, I committed a crime to find that out. And that's why I'm not going to tell you how I did it, but I did do it. And anyway, it freaked him out that I knew all this stuff. And basically, at that point, plus the fact that he was spiritually superstitious. So the fact that I was able to be that close to him, to know all this stuff, his whereabouts and everything for 2 solid weeks, and he didn't know I was there, I suppose that made him wonder what kind of a ghost I am, that I was able to do that. But anyway, the bottom line is he left me alone then, and he was scared of me. And I pull into the yard. Now, the landlord and landlady lived across the road in another house identical to the house where my friends lived and where Christine lived. And rather than pull into the driveway so I could be in the middle of the big fight, I pulled into the landlord and landlady's driveway, and I also knew them. Their names were Linda and Rob, and I knew them, and I was friends with them too. So what I did is I pulled into their driveway, and I got out of the car, and Larry's punching the crap out of Christine in the driveway and roaring at her and stuff. And Christine, she points, as I'm getting out of my car, she points over in my direction, and she says, there's Tom. Do you want him to come over? Do you want Tom to come over? And Larry was just like, Tom, no, I don't want Tom, no. I just kind of, well, whatever, So I go inside into Rob and Linda's place. I knock on their door and they invite me in. And we're standing in the kitchen window now watching the big fight take place across the road. And at one point, Christine pulled the golf club out of Larry's truck, the one he was going to beat me to death with, and she chased him around the driveway with it. She was beating him all across his shoulders and the back of his head and stuff. And they disappeared around my friend Jim's auto tractor. That's what he called this thing, around behind it. Back in the early 70s, Jim was a mechanic. And back in the early 70s, Jim had built a tractor out of the frame of an old 1930s Chev truck. And he had built this tractor. It had a plywood cab on it and stuff. It had a big snowblower on it. And he called it his auto tractor, is what he called it. Anyway, it was parked in the driveway there. Jim used to use it to clear snow and stuff like that. It worked really well. And they disappeared around behind the auto tractor. And when they came around the other side of it, Larry had the golf club. So he had managed to take the golf club off Christine. And now he was whacking her with the golf club. Anyway, he knocked her to the ground, and then he started putting the boots to her. And Christine was a fairly hefty woman. She was not a small woman. And every time he kicked her, she was laid on the ground beside Jim's auto tractor. Every time he kicked her, you could see her body would actually come up off the ground. That's how hard he was kicking her. And after he did that, he got into his truck, and he took off out of there. Gravel flying and all the rest of it. Left her laying there beside the auto tractor. Well, I mean, the way I looked at it is, and maybe this wasn't right of me, I don't know, but I figured that's her problem, I'm not getting mixed up in it. I had enough trouble with my own due to my association with these people, which just occurred because they were neighbors of friends of mine. That's the only reason I even knew them. But I had enough trouble. I figured she can deal with her situation herself. I'm not going to go over there to see if she's okay or anything else. I was past caring at that point. I figured she chooses this. Now, I didn't want her myself. I wasn't trying to take her away from Larry like Larry thought I was. But still, it kind of annoys me that women do this, It does, especially because women tend not to like me very much. Not that I wanted her to like me, but just in general, they don't. And so I get annoyed and I get resentful and I figure, that basically the crazy bitch made her bed, she can lie in it. That's how I was looking at it. And I tend to take that attitude with women at this point in my life. And, well, back then, too, I did. I was in my 40s back then, or my late 30s, I guess. And I had already developed enough resentment that's how I felt. This is what she likes, good for her. She can have it, and she can have it in abundance as far as I'm concerned. I'm not getting mixed up in it. I'm already in enough trouble without having done anything. So I just got in my car and I left. She was laid out there beside the tractor. Well, it turns out she was seriously hurt. She did actually end up going into the hospital by ambulance. She had some internal injuries and stuff. And anyway, when she got home from the hospital, the OPP paid her a visit because what had happened is the doctor had gotten it out of her what had happened, and the doctor then called the OPP and raised hell and forced them to charge Larry with aggravated assault. Well, the OPP were mad about having to charge Larry. They didn't want to charge him. So they paid her a visit, and again, my friends told me the story. They come in at night, they kicked her door in, They went up the stairs, and they could hear them up there beating her up and calling her a stupid bitch and telling her that she had better disappear for Larry's trial or they were going to murder her. This is the Ontario Provincial Police. This is what we have for a police department here in Canada. This is what our police are like. People think American police are bad, and no doubt they are. But, I mean, ours are no better, really, despite what people think. Anyway, Larry was in jail. The police went upstairs, and they beat Christine up and threatened to murder her if she didn't disappear for Larry's trial. The police, they took Larry for a bail hearing. The first judge they took him to denied bail, said you're going to stay in custody because, according to the record, you're too dangerous to be let out. And so we're going to keep you in custody. So then the police took Larry to a second judge who gave him bail, and he got out. And come his trial, it ended up he was acquitted because Christine had disappeared and so on. So he was acquitted. She disappeared, and then she came back after the trial. But this is the stuff that was going on anyway, and I found myself in the middle of that, all because I gave a half a pail of old golf balls to a couple of teenage boys so they could knock them off a hill behind the house. That's how I got myself into all that trouble, just by doing that. Like, it's a dangerous world, what can I tell you? Anyway, Scary Larry is still around. I haven't seen him in years, but I know he's still around. And yeah, well, yeah, he's still around anyway. As far as I know, his girlfriend, Christine, ended up going back to Quebec, where she came from eventually. But yeah, like I say, I see these situations all the time. And I don't quite understand it, but there's a lot of women who like drama, and I guess a guy like that provides them with it. There's always a payoff. If you're doing something, you're getting some sort of a payoff for it. So women who gravitate towards those kinds of men, and that's an awful lot of women, I'll tell you, they're getting a payoff for putting up with that. And, these are women who thrive on drama. That's why they gravitate towards that. Anyway, I was never interested in her. I was never trying to take her away from Larry or whatever. I was just visiting my friends who happened to live downstairs of her. Anyway, Christine eventually moved out. She actually moved in with Larry for a while, and that didn't work out. And then she went back to Quebec, as far as I know. But the day she moved out, my friends Jim and Della were going to take over her apartment. They were going to move upstairs because there was more room, and they now had their granddaughter full-time. They had custody of her and stuff, so they needed more room. And so they were going to take over the apartment upstairs. And I was there to help them move. So Larry and Christine were moving out of Christine's place. And we were all there just waiting to help Jim and Della move in once they were finished. So there's a bunch of us sitting in the garage. Larry happens to walk through the garage. And he started to freak out at Della because he was mad that Della had me there, because he said, you know how I feel about Tom. And yet you're disrespecting me by having him here. You're disrespecting me, is what he said to Della. Well, Della had been drinking. When Della was drinking, she could be mouthy. And Della told him to shut his mouth, that she was tired of hearing from him or whatever. He could shut his mouth. Now, Della was a woman in her 60s. This was an older couple who were friends of mine. And she was in her 60s, and up there's a tail. Oh, there's the rest of the cat. Here we go. Anyway, Della was a woman in her 60s. And what does Larry do? She's sitting there on a chair in the garage. He gets in front of her, and he gets right down in front of her, and he puts his fist under her chin like that. And he's got his face about maybe 3-4 inches from her face, and he's bellowing in her face, just roaring at her. And he says, you tell me to shut my mouth? And then he takes his fist out from under her chin, and he's pointing into his mouth now. He's got his finger, and he's like that, into his mouth. He says, my mouth is God's mouth. All of my holes are God's holes. And nobody tells me to close one of God's holes. Just like that. Well, anyway, the son's friend, Sean, was there. Sean was a crackhead. Complete, Anyway. But Sean actually did get a hold of Larry, basically, and put a stop to it, which was good. But then, of course, for the rest of the night, we got to listen to Sean talk about how Jim can't protect his woman anymore because he's old and useless now, and how lucky Jim was that Sean was there to protect his woman for him. Sean went on about that for hours, so we got to listen to that. But anyway, it kind of neutralized Larry, and they got moved out, and we helped Jim and Della move in upstairs. What a ragtag bunch, though, the situations I get myself into. But, yeah. So anyway, that's Larry. Larry's holes are God's holes, and nobody tells Larry to close one of God's holes. So, there you go. Anyway, that's it. That's the story. This is kind of a long video, I know. Glad to be out of that situation. Golf ball gate. It was a real thing anyway, I guess. That's what I call it, golf ball gate. Like Watergate, but golf ball gate. Anyway, that's all it was. It was golf balls. It's funny, I remember a few years ago I was visiting Jim. Della passed away not too long after that, actually. She had cancer and she passed away. But I had visited Jim anyway, and I forget how we got onto it, but Jim said something about golf balls. And I said to him, oh, please don't mention golf balls. I said, I've got PTSD from golf balls. I said, don't mention golf balls. And he just started to laugh, And Jim was one of those people. He had false teeth, and he was shrinking. As he got older, he was getting smaller. And his false teeth now were too big for his mouth. So when he grinned, he had this horsey grin, these big teeth be popping out of his mouth. It was the funniest thing. But he just grinned at me anyway when I said that. I said, oh, please don't mention golf balls. I said, I've had enough. I said, I've got PTSD now because of golf balls. I said, please don't mention golf balls, Anyway, that's it. Good morning to everyone. I hope you're all having a good day so far, wherever you're at in it. We cover a lot of time zones here. There's Rocky. Hi, Rocky. Good morning. Good morning, Rocky. Hey, that's my Rocky. All right. I hope that the sound was captured on this video all the way through. Who knows? It's a long video. I'm up to 44 minutes, almost 45 minutes. All right. We'll talk later.